Alright, today we're going to answer the question, what is terrorism? And this is something you hear daily on the news, really the last 15 years, and even before that. So first off, what it is. The exact definition is, it's the use of violence and intimidation in pursuit of political aims. These can be nationalistic aims, economic, environmental, or religious aims as well. So it all kind of goes, political is kind of a big umbrella term for all of them. So there are two types and three characteristics. The two types of terrorism are foreign and domestic, and really the main difference between them is foreign attacks occur primarily outside the U.S., and it's generally from foreign groups that can transcend national boundaries. So Al-Qaeda it's not restrained by national boundaries. It can attack anywhere, and it's a foreign threat. Domestic is occurring within the U.S., U.S. citizens doing it. So the Boston Marathon bombing, the Oklahoma City bombing would all be domestic threats, events inside our country by our own citizens. And the three characteristics they both share, it's to intimidate a population, influence the policy of a government, or to affect the conduct of a government. Whereas a foreign group's trying to influence our government, a domestic group would be trying to influence ours as well, but from an internal stance. Some examples, you've probably heard a lot of these foreign groups, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. They're on CNN pretty much every day. One of these groups are. Al-Qaeda's the international group, ISIS in Iraq and Syria, Boko Haram in Nigeria. They're the ones that abducted all the schoolgirls. Al-Shabaab in Somalia. They just recently attacked a university in Kenya. And Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is causing a lot of the problems in Yemen. And an old group you might not have heard of is the Irish Republican Army, which is still in existence, but they're no longer active. Some domestic groups you may or may not have heard of were Timothy McVeigh and the Oklahoma City bombing, the Boston Marathon, this thing called the Army of God, which before you were born, when the Olympics were in Atlanta, this guy Eric Rudolph set off a bomb at Centennial Olympic Park. A guy from the 70s and 80s called the Unabomber. He lived in a cabin by himself, grew a beard, and sent mail bombs to most universities and technology companies. And he's now serving the rest of his life in prison. And one you probably have heard of is the Ku Klux Klan. The modern one is still considered a domestic terror threat. So basically, terrorism, whether foreign or domestic, is aimed to change not only a government or its policies, but to incite fear in the citizens by making them the main targets of terrorism. So a terrorist group's main target is civilians. Now, motivations can range. The two biggest ones we hear about today are religious and nationalism. Religious would be ISIS trying to install a caliphate in the Middle East with that very strict medieval interpretation of Islam. That's their religious agenda. Another one would be the nationalism agenda of the IRA. Now, if you've never heard of the IRA, the conflict ended before you were born probably. The IRA fought the British for control of Northern Ireland using terror tactics in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And their goal was to push the British out and have Northern Ireland join Ireland and make the island one country instead of split. You also have environmental groups that use terror tactics as well. Now, you've probably heard of this and seen this, 9/11, which was the attack on September 11th where 4 planes were skyjacked, 2 crashing into the World Trade Center, a 3rd crashing into the Pentagon, and a 4th hijacked plane was crashed in a Pennsylvania field due to a passenger revolt before it could reach its target, which they believe was either the White House or the Capitol. So since then, the U.S. is engaged in the war on terrorism, which is a global fight on numerous fronts to fight Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups. And the battlefields are diverse from mountainous terrain in Afghanistan, deserts in Iraq, to the jungles of Nigeria where we're fighting Boko Haram now. Or even on our own streets where you can see, looking at police departments over the last 15 years, they've become more militarized, more heavy weaponry. You see this with the Boston bombing, how they can respond. Even going to the airport and having the stringent security of TSA. Hope this has helped answer the question you might have had about what is terrorism.